Keep yourself in the loop of everything football on the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast. The latest news on and off the field, be it college football, Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC to the NFL. We've got you covered. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast.
Welcome into the GSMC Football Podcast, right here on the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Brice Lewis, and obviously we have another jam-packed show for you today, talking about all things professional and college today on the show. Obviously, if you missed our last show with me and Neat, you get our show that dropped Tuesday, as we talked about the status of the league, basically, where we all are, some things that are happening with colleges. Obviously, you see colleges being very much affected by the COVID-19 pandemic as well, so we've been getting more into that. And there seems like there's new stories coming out of college on a week-to-week basis, so obviously, we're going to do in this show. We're going to cover all of that today. Just keep, an idea on everything that's kind of, just keeping a pulse on what maybe people are thinking around the league. Obviously, seeing all these opt-outs and everything, it's kind of, it's different, when you're seeing it in college and professional. So, it's something that kind of shows the change in what's going on right now in the NFL and in college football as well. As also, we're going to talk about a team and a program who's decided to cancel their season, which is the first team in the FBS to cancel it. We're going to discuss that in the show, and we're going to discuss other things as such of related topics. But to start off the show, we're going to get into the state of the NFL, the state of where the NFL is right now with everything happening with the COVID-19 pandemic and the direction of this league moving forward. So, clearly, COVID-19's hit. Obviously, it's not something anybody likes. It's making people feel very uncertain about the season. It feels like week after week, is there a chance that they could say, we can't do the season? And are the rules and protocols that the NFL put in place enough to, deal with and handle the potential risks that come with playing the season? It really just, it depends on each person, every opinion that's listening, every player that thinks about this decision on a day-to-day basis. Obviously, we even talked about on our podcast that they came to a deadline date on Thursday. So Thursday is the day when this actually podcast drops that they have to make the deadline. Okay, are we playing or not? So you might see a lot of players overnight into the next day opting out because, that's kind of how that goes. And so we'll have to see how it all kind of works out when it's all said and done when it comes to that. But the league right now is in a very tough position because since they're not going to do a bubble, it's kind of one of those positions where it's like if they do the season and then players are getting infected with COVID-19 left and right because they give players the freedom to move around and do things. How many cases, what type of breakout would be the thing that says, all right, guys, we have to kind of cancel the season? Because I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, what if, with baseball, you're seeing basically teams have mass outbreaks within the team, within the clubhouse, within the organization. So what if an NFL team had a breakout? 15, 16 players tested positive for COVID. I would think you'd have to cancel whatever game they're in because, unless you're going to allow them to have 16 players, maybe call out the practice squad, maybe a couple extra players to replace them on game day. They wouldn't have any depth behind the players they have. You just lost 15, 16 guys. You know what I'm saying? Like how could you justify still playing a game? Then you're wondering, the players that maybe didn't test positive have been exposed to them. So you're like, okay, it's kind of risky maybe making this decision. So I'm sure they know it's risky. So it really just depends. And what we're going to do here, is we're going to read an article from The Ringer breaking down how the COVID-19 pandemic is basically kind of upending the league right now. And, this is just really going to talk about how the opt-outs are the big effect of what's going on, what's affecting the season, and everything like that. It's one of those things where you kind of have to, after reading the article, you kind of have to look at where we are right now and think to yourself, what's going to happen? The NFL is trying to do a contract tracing to try to limit it and try to, be able to contain it. And also, like I said, I'm going to read the article from The Ringer about how will the NFL's COVID-19 testing and contact tracing work. So, in the article, it says, NFL players reported to training camps on Tuesday as the largest pro sports league in the country becomes the last to confront the coronavirus. The NFL has already canceled the preseason altered training camp due to the COVID-19 pandemic, but the regular season is still slated to begin with the defending Super Bowl champs Kansas City Chiefs and the Houston Texans kicking it off Thursday, September 10th. Whereas the NBA, and the NHL, teams will finish their 2019-2020 seasons contained in bubbles in Orlando and Canada, respectively. The NFL is eschewing that model. The league's 32 teams are scheduled to play their games at their respective home cities across 22 states for the coming season, with more than 5,000 players, coaches, and essential staff members living in their own homes. The NFL's goal is to mitigate the virus spread by testing players and essential staffers daily. Players who test positive and have symptoms must wait 10 days after their positive test, have 72 hours without any symptoms, test negative, and be approved by a team doctor in consultation with the league's medical officials to return. According to reporting by NBC's Peter King, players who test positive and are asymptomatic must wait at least 5 days and test negative twice before being allowed to return, or wait a total of 10 days. Isolating players who test positive is an easy decision, but determining everyone who was exposed to an infected person is a challenge. In a sport like football, there is no playbook for contract tracing in a contact sport. The point of the testing really is to be able to do contact tracing, says Jill Weatherhead, an assistant professor of tropical medicine and infectious diseases at Baylor's College of Medicine. If you know you're positive, then we can look around and see who you've been in contact with that possibly could have picked up the virus from you, and then those people would then be quarantined. The Centers of Disease and Control Prevention recommends that anyone who has spent more than 15 minutes within 6 feet of somebody who has COVID-19 should be quarantined for 14 days. On the field, football players are continually within 6 feet of each other, especially at the line of scrimmage. Even if distancing 6 feet during football games and practices were possible, it might not be enough. Studies are super spreading events such as fitness classes in South Korea and choir practice in Washington suggest that heavy breathing may spread droplets as far as 12 feet or 4 yards, according to Gretchen Newman, an assistant professor of infectious disease at Wayne State University in Detroit. For football players on the field while they're playing, the linemen are really the most at risk to become infected. Athletes are professional droplet producers. According to a CDC analysis of cases from February to May, COVID-19's mortality rate was higher than in people over 65. This has led to some to conclude that professional athletes' peak physical fitness would be minimally affected by contracting the virus. But Newman says that isn't the case. There is increasing evidence that COVID-19 can damage lungs, heart, and even the brain. Red Sox pitcher Eduardo Rodriguez confirmed this week he has been dealing with myocarditis, a heart complication of a result of COVID-19. Newman says that while the average person who contracts and recovers from COVID-19 may not notice they lose 2% of their lung capacity, elite athletes will definitely notice. The long-lasting lung or heart problems could be career-ending. Getting really, really sick but not dying can also have very negative long-term consequences. You don't have to die and for it to be bad. As obviously, there's some system that's protected the case. Since football players can't social distance while they play, the NFL is experimenting with face masks on helmets to mitigate droplet spread. But the face masks aren't mandatory yet, and some players, including Texas defensive end J.J. Watt, have said they won't wear something that restricts their breathing. But even if they do wear their face mask, Newman doubts prototypes will actually work without filters. The holes make it kind of useless, she said. It's better than nothing, but it's not good. If it's just a piece of plastic with a giant hole in it, it's not doing a ton. Ravens starting tight end Mark Andrews, one of the 2 known players with type 1 diabetes, already wears a Dexcom monitor during games to manage his diabetes. He told The Ringer he's open to wearing masks during games when not playing. I don't think people really understand how much wearing a mask can really prevent the spread. Andrew says, I have no problems wearing it. On the practice field, on the sidelines, I don't know if I'll be wearing it when I'm playing, but if I'm on the sideline and my helmet's off, I don't see why I wouldn't wear it. I'm going to wear it as much as possible. Per as agreement earlier in the month, the NFL's 32 teams were required to submit team-specific protocols as of Tuesday. The NFL Players Association has approved 25. Teams have overhauled their facilities to accommodate daily testing, staggered player schedules for weight training, and changed facilities for eating, showering, accessing the locker room. All team players, a maximum of 80 in training camp, and essential employees, roughly 100, will wear a device while at the facility that will track them through the building and in the event of a positive test, identify who was in close contact so they can be isolated. The league has also created a COVID-19 reserve list, a sort of injured reserve for players who test positive or have been quarantined for exposure. Players who contract the virus at high-risk indoor venues that are hosting more than 15 people, bars, nightclubs, house parties, and concerts could be fined. Players who attend an indoor religious service at more than 25% capacity may also be fined. Regardless of how much teams mitigate the virus spread at their facilities and threatens punishments for the players outside, players and employees are still living in local communities where the league has no control over the community spread. J.C. Trotter, the Cleveland Browns center, told the NFL Players Association president the Boston Globe last week the NFL's current guidelines clash with the basics of football. If a center tests positive on Friday, there's a quarantine period for all his close contacts, aren't we talking about 35 players in close contact with me? A football writer and epidemiologist at Oxford College of Emory University said the league would be wise to change practices drastically to limit contact between football players, even if coaches disagree. I would pitch it to a coach just from a pure self-interest perspective. If you have a couple of cases on your team, coach, don't you want that to stay between the two than lose 12 guys, because you're not going to win a game if you lose 12 guys off your roster. And there's other things here in the article, but we're not going to read it all. But basically, that's a sum up of what's going on, the perceptions that are going on, what people are thinking. And so you could easily see and you could easily tell that if you think about it realistically, from a realistic perspective, the NFL is in, like I said, big trouble right now with everything, because there's so many concerns, there's so much what ifs, there's so much people are unsure about, and the NFL really has to figure out what they can do to really solve the problem. I think that's the biggest thing that really, affects the game and affects the system of football. And we'll have to see when the season comes around and training camp really gears up how things are going to look, because there's a lot of risks that are being taken here, and it really could honestly look bad or hurt at the end of the day, which could really affect basically the perception of the league, especially if, like I said, like J.C. Trotter said, I'm around 35 players. If I get COVID, are you telling me all 35 guys also have to be quarantined? How would we play? We would have to cancel games, and it just seems like the NFL right now is in a very tight spot. Honestly, if they were able to pair it off, honestly, at this point, it would seem like it would be a miracle at this point if they were able to actually do it. But that's all we have here. Coming up next, we're switching to college football, and we're going to talk about the team who canceled their football season. Will other teams cancel, and what is the state of college football? Stay tuned for all that here and more right here on the podcast.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's GSMCpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment, we broke down the state of the NFL and read an article of Ringer discussing the challenges that the league will be facing with COVID-19, how COVID-19 is affecting everything, certain things players are saying, certain perceptions around everything that's happening with the league, and how can the NFL truly, with their testing and contact tracing, can they truly be able to slow down and keep up with who has COVID-19 to the point where it won't affect a large portion of players, a large portion of the league, and be able to keep the NFL season going. That is going to be the big question here, and that's a question we're going to have to see if it's possible. We're going to have to see if they can actually pull it off. And, listen, I mean, like I said, a lot of people have different opinions on it. It just depends on how you feel about it, but it's going to be tight. It's going to be tight. So we'll have to see how it all kind of comes together when it's all said and done. But now we're going to switch to the college football landscape as some big news, big breaking news has came out of the college football landscape. And basically, the UConn Huskies have decided to cancel their season. So the Connecticut Huskies, the UConn Huskies, University of Connecticut Huskies, have decided to cancel their season. And they are the first FBS team to actually cancel this season. So obviously this is big news because anybody who has UConn on the schedule now has an open game. Now obviously if you're a non-conference it doesn't matter, but within the conference, I mean, they may have to just fill in with another conference game, potentially. Or they may have to shorten the game potentially as well. So it's definitely, a big dilemma. We're going to read an article from Booth Report about it. And then I'm going to break down what do I think this means for the entire college football landscape. So, an article from Tim Daniels. The University of Connecticut Athletic Department announced Wednesday it won't take part in the 2020 college football season because of the coronavirus pandemic. After receiving guidance from the state and public health officials and consulting with football student athletes, we have decided that we will not compete on the gridiron this season, Athletic Director Dave Benedict said. The safety challenges created by COVID-19 place our football student athletes at an unacceptable level of risk. The Huskies were scheduled to compete as an independent after in 2020 after leaving the American Athletic Conference and joining the Big East in all sports except football. UConn is the first FBS program to cancel their football season among the pandemic. We engaged and listened to the concerns of our football student athletes and feel like this is the best decision for our health, safety, and well-being, head coach Randy Estall said. Our team is united in this approach, and we will use this time to further player development within the program and get ourselves ready for the 2020-2021 season. The 2021 season. The athletic department confirmed Huskies football players registered 0 positive tests for COVID since returning to campus in early July. UConn would have likely struggled to fill out its schedule without a conference designation, as the focus in major college football has shifted towards conference-only opponents. Games against Illinois, Indiana, Maine, Mississippi had already been removed from the Huskies slate as a result. The players released a joint statement as part of the school's announcement. As a team, we are in full support of the decision not to compete in 2020. We have many health concerns not enough is known about the potential long-term effects of contracting COVID-19. Additionally, we have had an optimal time to train mentally and physically to be properly prepared to compete this season. We love the game and love competing. We came to campus in the beginning of July knowing there would be challenges presented by the pandemic, but it is apparent to us now that those challenges are impossible to overcome. The Huskies struggled since they joined the American Conference in 2013. They've failed to register a winning record over the last 7 seasons, including a 6-30 mark since their return to the program in 2017. UCONN's announcement noted players who remain full-time students at school and retain access to team facilities to remain on track academically and developmentally. The athletic department says it will continue to work with the Big East to determine the fate of its other fall sports. So there you go. There you go. As you can tell, like I said, it's a tough situation. And, I commend UConn for being able to make this tough decision. Because not a lot of teams are willing to make this decision. Obviously, we can say UConn's not a big program. They're not making as much money. They're not in a major conference. And then so maybe they could afford to do this. But it is big. Because you never know if other teams may sit here and say, you know what? This isn't worth it either. We need to cancel our season. Everything needs that one domino to fall, and then you may see a domino effect. And this could potentially be where the domino effect happens. UConn canceling their season may make another team say, you know what? There's no point for us to play this season. Obviously, I think you're going to see probably more Group of 5 teams cancel seasons more than Power 5 teams. But, that's pretty much how it's looking right now. And honestly, yeah, like I said, you got to think about what's been happening in college football recently with a lot of stuff dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. You have the Pac-12 players coming together, protesting against the Pac-12, saying, give us this and we'll play. If not, we're not going to play. So clearly you see, players are concerned about their safety and well-being, and just because their student athletes not getting paid doesn't mean they shouldn't be able to get what they need to feel comfortable to play. You got players, obviously, who are probably projected top 3 round draft picks opting out of teams' seasons, saying, you know what, there's no point for me to face the risk. Let me just go ahead and train for the NFL draft, and then I'll have to let my guys play the season without me. So you have a lot of players opting out from that perspective. Again, I told you, you're seeing a lot of guys who are going to be going to the draft opting out. And then, SEC, they're about to go to a conference-only schedule, but you have some players in the SEC who aren't comfortable with what they're doing in the SEC to handle the situation. It's a forever growing and evolving situation. And it's something that's going to probably linger around the college football landscape for a while. And college football has it feels like college football is out of the 2 leagues is the most at risk because there's more schools, more teams, more players. And then remember, it's not like these players can go home and then just chill there until practice and games. They live on a college campus with thousands of other college students. Most of these big programs are big programs with 20, 30,000 kids. And you're telling me you want them to play and hope they don't contract it from any of their classmates. I mean, and they're all in a tight, confined space. It's not like they can live on the other side of the town and then come back. No, they're all within that area of wherever the college campus is. And then these college athletes are not going to be isolated in their dorm room the whole time or wherever they live. And they're going to want to hang out with their friends. And then, to me, college football is the more at risk, more likely to have a large number of tests, which you've already seen. We've seen reports of people from Rutgers, 27 to 32 players have tested positive for COVID-19. Remember, all the players that came in from the offseason, I guess, coming for the workouts, voluntary workouts. You saw waves of team players just having COVID. So as you could tell, like, yeah, that shit's around. It's around. And it's crazy. It really is. It really, really is. It's something that, you know, we're going to have to see what college football actually ends up doing. Because it could be a domino effect, either this way. If college football doesn't feel like they can have a season, I don't think it would affect the NFL, but I do feel like if the NFL said they couldn't have a season, that would affect college football, because if you're telling me the biggest league that we have in this country does not feel comfortable having a season, how do we, how can we as college feel comfortable having a season? I mean, listen, I get why they're doing it. It's a big battle of just, we have to at least try and see if we can maybe be able to pull this off. Like, I understand it. We have to see if we're able to pull it off. And if we can pull it off, that's great for us. But if we're not able to pull it off, it's like, at least we tried. But obviously the only risk would be if any of these players get COVID-19 and it maybe kills one of them, or even affects them long-term with health issues. The NCAA will be under fire and just very scrutinizing pressure, because you literally sat here and said, we are playing this season and we're going to put the players at risk, and this is the consequences of it. I think that's where everybody's kind of where they're just kind of like, I don't know. Like I said, I think you'll see a lot of top players opt out in college football this year. I think, like I said, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, people bring up rumors. Would a guy like Trevor Lawrence opt out? Ethan brought it up in our last show, because he'll probably be the first overall draft pick regardless. He doesn't necessarily have to play this. I said the only reason why he would be playing is just to, I lost in the national championship game. The way we lost made me angry, and I want to make it back with my guys. But outside of that, I mean, think about it. If you're Trevor Lawrence, if your top receiver comeback opts out, and your top running back opts out, and whether your top defensive players opt out, what reason do you have to stay? You might as well opt out too. You're going to be the first overall draft pick. Your future has been set since your freshman year. So this really is almost like a courtesy to Clemson. Like, hey, I committed here and I want to play football. But he could opt out. I mean, I feel like if Trevor Lawrence opts out, that's going to send a huge shockwave among college football. Because now, I think we'll see players, especially of top 10, top 15, top 20, saying, if Trevor Lawrence opt out, I need to opt out. Because really, realistically, that top 10 especially, for the most part, you've already kind of been solidified. If anything, it's all about the draft order and what team needs are. Will depend on where you go. If you're a quarter, like, obviously you usually think at the top of the draft, somebody needs a quarterback, so Trevor Lawrence is probably going to go to whoever. Maybe you need a defensive end. You need pass rushing help desperately. You got a top defensive end coming in there. Well, shoot. I know whoever probably in the top can't rush the passer. I'm going to get my selection. So to me, it's like, to me, I just feel like it makes more sense at the end of the day for college football. I think has to really see, even with the delayed schedules and everything like that, if things don't get better and players continue to opt out, you may even see coaches and organizations and other campuses and colleges saying, you know what, NCAA, we're out. We're not playing this season. We're going to protect our players, and we'll just gear up for the next season. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing wrong with that either. And I think, honestly, a lot of people would commend them for making such a decision in that regard. But so, that's all we have here for this segment. Coming up next here on the GSMC Football Podcast, we're going to talk about more news on this whole how COVID-19 affects college and NFL players moving forward, and other football news right here on the podcast.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment we discussed UCONN, as they were the first official FBS team to cancel their season. Team and coaching and our athletic department coming out saying this was the best decision for everybody involved. We did not want to put our student athletes at risk among this pandemic, and this was the best decision, and we will focus towards the 2021 season. So now we also discussed, basically just the whole outbreak of how it views on college football and how it could impact college football moving forward. Could there potentially be a trickle-down effect from this from other teams? Obviously, I say probably more group of 5 teams would probably opt out before, a Power 5 team, just because money, financials, and everything like that. But, it really just depends. It really just goes hand in hand with it. So we'll have to see. We're going to continue on with, everything that's going on here with college football, and go back to the Ringer, as they have another article on saying that the college football's greatest facade is crackling. Great facade is crackling, and the fracture could reshape the sport, as this article obviously is going to dive into how they're trying to figure out what to do during the pandemic, and the decisions that will define this season will also really reveal how the sport really works. And this article, I think, is just very informational. Obviously, you can tell this so far, this podcast has been a very informational podcast. And so, obviously I'm here to, give this information out. Maybe this is something you never noticed, never seen, never heard, potentially like that. So obviously I'm just sitting here giving you the potential to, increase that on top of that and make it better. And we're going to start with this article by Roger Sherman. And he says this, and I quote, "College football is a lot of things. It's the packed stands on the frigid afternoon in the upper Midwest at a rivalry game that has been played since the invention of radio. It's empty bleachers on a 90-degree day in the Bahamas at a bowl game that was created a few years ago to fill a television slot. A college football Saturday starts at noon Eastern and ends at about 4 a.m. on Sunday morning when the Hawaii game wraps up in the middle of the Pacific. There's a team at a Mormon school and teams at Catholic schools. There are teams for future military members in the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Coast Guard. There are conferences for historically black schools. There are a team for deaf players. They invented the huddle. College football is a melting pot that produces gumbo at an LSU tailgate and fondue at a Harvard-Yale game. If you're American, there is probably at least some part of this sport that's for you." College football is a lot of things, and that makes it easy to romanticize. But the sport's size and diversity means that the schools involved have more differences than they do similarities. College football is Ohio State, a powerhouse that perennially competes for national championships and sends players to the NFL. College football is also Ohio, a team from a mid-American conference that needs the paychecks it receives for playing schools like Ohio State to break even. College football is any of the 21 Division III teams in the state of Ohio which don't give players scholarships and are able to survive primarily because athletes pay tuition. According to a 2016 report from the Department of Education, Ohio State generated close to $100 million from football. Ohio made around $10 million, and the three schools in Ohio didn't even break $1 million. College football is a lot like Canis familiaris, the species of a dog for dogs, all dogs, the ones that are 200 pounds and the ones you can hold in your palm. A Great Dane would starve itself if it was fed like a Yorkie's diet. A Yorkie would die if it tried to give birth to a Great Dane. Somewhere along the line, though, they all descended from a friendly wolves. Similarity, because all college football descended from students playing rugby against each other in the 1960s, we consider Ohio State, Ohio, and Division III schools in the state to be parts of the same college football system. College football is a lot of things, and that makes it nearly impossible to govern. This is especially problematic during a pandemic. No singular governing body is telling schools with teams what to do. There are differences in testing protocol. Clemson had dozens of positive players test for COVID-19 and simply kept practicing. Michigan State had one player and 2 staff members test positive and quarantined the entire program for 2 weeks. Meanwhile, Toledo has said that it can't afford to test players regularly, even though its football team returned to practice. Incidentally, Toledo's head coach recently tested for COVID-19. There are also differences in scheduling protocol. The Big Ten announced on July 9th that it would go to a conference-only schedule in an attempt to limit the spread of the virus. The Pac-12 and SEC have followed suit. On Wednesday, the ACC said it would only play an 11-game schedule with 10 conference matchups and 1 non-conference matchup of their choosing. Yet, in Division II and Division III, many conferences have either canceled their seasons outright or moved them to spring. All this while the Big 12 schools are adding games to their fall schedules, replacing canceled ones, and in some cases bumping up their start dates. The level of disarray is unseen among anywhere in the American sports landscape. In the NBA, WNBA, NHL, NWSL, and MLS, the owners and players decided to play the seasons in contained bubbles. The owners, players in the NFL and NBA had more contentious negotiations, but both sides eventually came to an agreement on health and financial protocols. It's easy to see why these sports were better suited to reach the agreements than the NCAA. The richest and poorest NBA team owners are both billionaires who made rich sums off money of their teams. The richest and poorest NBA players are both pro athletes who have accepted the physical risk of sports in exchange for a paycheck. When the sides met to determine how to play games in a pandemic, the goals were both clear and a deal was struck. College football has no such clarity. The lack of leadership over the past few months have prompted calls for the sport to install a commissioner who can make decisions and take control. But if there was a single commissioner for college football, who would that commissioner serve? The schools would be financially ruined by the loss of college football this year, or the schools would be financially ruined by playing the college football this year. I'd say maybe a commissioner would look out for the players, but remember, this is college football. This lack of clarity has also exposed the fundamental flaws in the sport that have led to 2 massive developments on Sunday. Sports Illustrated reported that members of the Power 5 conferences, the ACC, Big Ten, Big 12, Pac-12, and SEC are now exploring the possibility of staging their own championships in all variety of sports in varsity sports without sanctioning from the NCAA. This would allow moneyed conferences to keep playing sports even if the poor leagues can no longer afford to because of coronavirus losses. It would mark a split between the biggest leagues and everyone else. One athletic director suggested to SI that such a move could be the final break between the Power 5 and the rest of the NCAA. Meanwhile, hundreds of Pac-12 players published a letter in the Players Tribune in which they threatened to sit out the season unless their school agreed to a list of demands designed to improve the student-athlete welfare. These demands included enhanced coronavirus protections, the creation of civic engagement risk task force to address racial injustice in college sports and in society, the freedom to make money off name, image, and likeness rights, and a distribution of 50% of each sport's total conference revenue evenly among their athletes in their respective sports. These changes will require the Pac-12 to leave the NCAA, which the players understand. Right now, it's clear the conferences don't need the NCAA. The founder of National College Players Association, Ramana Huma, each conference is an industry unto itself. And obviously that's been noticed and seen multiple times. The schools that generate the most revenue from their teams are making decisions out of self-interest. The players at some of those schools are pointing that out, and the people who are not nominally in charge of governing the sport are abstaining from their using their limited power, thereby enabling these schools. The other schools are probably wondering why they're a part of the structure that isn't meant to serve them. College football is a lot of things, and right now nothing binds those things together. College football is a lot of things, and so sometimes college football means in different contexts. For example, a writer can say that Oklahoma State's Chuba Hubbard is college football's leading rusher in 2019, and I wouldn't call it inaccurate, even though Jamel McLaughlin of Notre Dame College rushed for 2,316 yards in Division II. Hubbard rushed for 2,098, but he plays in Division I. Another example, there is a competitive competition called the College Football Playoff, the 4-team championship bracket that for 130 teams that make up the Sub-Bowl division, FBS, the upper tier of Division I. However, the Football Championship subdivision, the lower tier, holds a 24-team playoff to decide its champion, and Division II and Division III ranks also have playoff brackets. I guess you could call the FCS D2 and D3 competitions college football playoffs, although none of the college football playoff are the college football playoff. Despite this, nobody gets mad about the FBS labeling it the college football playoff because, for the most part, college football refers to the brand name teams eligible for the FBS title. Of course, you could argue that not all FBS teams are really eligible for the college football playoff. The college football playoffs at the FCS D2 and D3 levels are sanctioned by the NCAA, as are the championships at any of the levels of NCAA varsity sports. Yet the NCAA has allowed the top tier of college football to create its own championship system. In 2014, the college football playoff was born, operated and owned by the 10 FBS leagues in Notre Dame, not the Notre Dame College where McLaughlin ran for 2,000 yards. The University of Notre Dame. This event is highly profitable. ESPN pays about $470 million a year to broadcast the games on their network. By rule, the College Football Selection Committee must include the athletic directors from 5 FBS conferences, the ACC, Big 10, Big 12, Pac-12, and SEC. That's right, the Power 5. The other 5 conferences, referred as the Group of 5 because of the Powerless 5, didn't stick, have yet to get a single team into the College Football Playoff, even though they're supposedly eligible and sometimes go undefeated. These conferences are technically part of college football, but they're generally treated as if they were merely part of college football. According to the NCAA's terminology, the Power 5 are called the autonomy conferences. For years, Power 5 schools proposed giving schools the ability to provide athletes with spenders that they could be voted down by hundreds of schools of other conferences if they didn't have the financial resources to do so. So the NCAA granted the power for the Power 5 to be able to create its own rules via an incredibly complex voting system that requires explainers. The Power 5 are an elite subset within an elite subset of college football, and yet they are still part of the same overall college football structure as everyone else. The closest thing that college football has to a commissioner is the NCAA Board of Governors, which recently held a meeting whether NCAA sports should hold fall championships during the pandemic. The board was not to decide, as it punted the choice to a later date. But the fact that the board of governors was even tasked with this decision says a lot. The board has no other impact on the college football playoff, if the college football playoff takes place this season, but it's disproportionately comprised of representatives from the schools that are eligible for the event. By rule, the eight of the board's 25 members on the FBS and 6 of the other Division I schools and 6 are all from the other divisions combined. The board also includes 5 independent members, including Grant Hill, to summarize. The 130 schools get 8 spots on the board that decides whether Division II, Division III have championships as well. While 700 plus Division II and Division III schools have just 6 spots. Representatives from the FBS will likely hold fall sports championships at all levels because that will make it easier to justify having their profitable football season. Reps from D2, D3 schools will not have the opportunity to reappropriate by voting against college football playoffs because the FBS runs that with zero input from anyone else. And so, as you can tell, that gives you more of a big insight into what's going on here within the NCAA landscape and why just you could tell from that article just so many big changes can be made. So many big changes can be made within college football. And you really see, I guess, the power structure and the construction of the NCAA is just so non-existent. A league that gets their public image tarnished isn't really even the main people controlling the league. They just set some general rules that some people don't agree with, but it's really the conferences who are in power and who are in control of deciding what happens, and we judge them based upon. But when a conference makes a decision, we look at the NCAA because they're allowing it to happen, and that's why they're attacked in the public image. And we're going to continue with this next segment as another team, another conference, the Big Ten, has now made demands. The players have made demands towards the Big Ten coming towards the season and other football news. So stay tuned for all that here and more on the GSMC Football Podcast.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment right here on the podcast, we got into some more discussions of what's happening in the college football world. We talked about long-term effects, players opting out, and just other stories around college football that's really, affecting the game right now, and just other things like that. So obviously you can tell college football is in a state of array. Honestly, we talked about an article from The Ringer where basically it's showing that the NCAA has never had much construction, really. Everybody's kind of governed themselves, even though the NCAA is the face, but they've never had a constructive leadership. And you're kind of seeing it now because every conference is just making their own decisions. Every division is just making their own decisions. And it's just kind of like a different thing that we don't have that one person who can govern everything, and it's just something that I think really kind of builds up over time. And that's why they said this could really make the NCAA have to make some serious changes to their system moving forward because of the fact. So we'll have to see how everything kind of turns out when it comes to that. Now we're going to get into some more stuff. Obviously, like I said, very informational podcast today. Not too much going on in the league, but we have a very informational podcast today. And now we're going to get into some more conversation and talk about the Big Ten, as the Big Ten football players call for increased COVID-19 safety measures in a proposal. So I told you earlier, Pac-12 did it. Other conferences could do it. Now the Big Ten is doing it. In an article by Tim Daniels, it says, and I quote, Big Ten football players released a statement through the College Athletic Unity Organization Wednesday, seeking more comprehensive conversations with the NCAA and the conference about safety measures for the 2020 college football season amid the coronavirus pandemic. A 24-point plan called the Big Ten Unity Proposal, posted on the Players Tribune, seeks further oversight and transparency about the handling of COVID-19 after the conference announced the schedule and pandemic protocols for the upcoming season earlier Wednesday. While we appreciate the Big Ten's recently announced plan for the upcoming season, we believe that the conference proposal falls short in certain areas. Given that players are the primary stakeholders in the business of college sports, we believe any course of action moving forward needs to include player input. We are deeply disappointed with the lack of leadership demonstrated by the NCAA with respect to player safety during the COVID-19 pandemic. We believe that the NCAA must on its own, through collaboration with conference, devise a comprehensive plan to ensure the safety and well-being of players leading up to during the upcoming fall season. The statement took aim at the NCAA, which the player says has taken a laissez-faire approach by leaving major decisions about the 2020 season up to individual conferences. Given that the NCAA and the conference leadership has not asked for our input, we feel compelled to call for clarity, commitment, and action regarding our common sense proposal below. The statement read, among the requests by players is a third-party group in charge of handling COVID-19 testing. In addition, it wants to mandate for members of the athletic departments to report potential violations of protocol and whistleblower protections for those who do. Players are also seeking a minimum of 3 weekly coronavirus tests, including one on the day of competition. The Big Ten proposed 2 weekly tests for high-contact sports. Players also want a wide range of assurances and protections, including a ban on liability waivers and medical red shirt for players who miss time because of a positive test. Coverage of medical expenses incurred because of COVID-19 and a preservation of scholarships if the season is ultimately canceled. Pac-12 players released a similar list of unity demands Monday. The Players Tribune and threatened to boycott the 2020 season if concessions weren't made by the NCAA and the conference. We are united in our commitment to secure fair treatment for college athletes. Their statement read, due to COVID-19 and other serious concerns, we will opt out of the Pac-12 fall camp and game participation unless the following demands are guaranteed in writing by our conference to protect and benefit both scholarship athletes and walk-ons. Big Ten players didn't make a reference to potential boycott but urged a rapid increase in talks. We have started dialogue in good faith with the Big Ten and hope that the NCAA will follow suit, they said. Given the short time frame with our season at stake, the conversation must happen now. The Big Ten schedule released Wednesday calls for practice to begin Friday, with the start of the regular season, a 10-game conference-only slate set for September 5th. So obviously, you can tell, another band of players have banded together. And, it clearly shows, that players in college are like, listen, we don't want to play and compete and put ourselves at risk if we're not getting guaranteed the protections that we deserve. Because they care about their protections. They care about making sure they're good. They care about, making sure that they're in good shape, because they don't want to potentially put themselves at risk to potentially be hindered into the future. As they should, because they shouldn't want to put themselves at risk for something bad could happen to them, and then they're affected long term because of these decisions. They don't want to be put into that position of, we got messed up, we got by what's happening in the whole grand scheme of things, and we'll have to see. We'll have to see what happens with it, and we'll have to see, how things are going. So. Obviously, that was big, and then listen, I told you before, we don't know if this could potentially lead to more conferences and players standing up against the conference to say, listen, we're not going to sit here and just take whatever y'all say. We're going to sit here and demand more to protect us if y'all want us out there on that field. So it's completely understandable why these decisions have been made and why they're doing what they're doing. But to continue on, another story, the NCAA also announces conferences must make a decision on fall sports by August 21st. So, in the article, the NCAA Board of Directors announced Wednesday conferences must make a final decision about whether fall sports will be contested by August 21st. First and foremost, we need to make sure that we provide a safe environment for college athletes to compete for the opportunity to play in NCAA championships. NCAA President Mark Arrett said. A decision based on realities in each division will provide clarity for conferences and campuses as they determine how to safely begin the academic year and return to sports. The NCAA stated the national championship won't be awarded if more than 50% of the teams eligible to compete for the title in that sport cancel their seasons because of the coronavirus pandemic. Other guidelines include a hotline for student athletes, parents, and others to report potential violations of COVID-19 safety requirements. Programs are not allowed to require students to sign liability waivers related to the pandemic, and there's a guarantee on scholarships even if a player opts out of the 2020 season. The announcement addresses some of the concerns raised by football athletes from the Pac-12 and Big Ten in the Players Tribune this week. # We are united in our commitment to secure fair and treatment for college athletes, Pac-12 players wrote. Due to COVID-19 and other serious concerns, we will opt out of the Pac-12 fall champion camp and game participation unless the following demands are guaranteed in writing by our conference to protect and benefit both scholarships and walk-ons. The Big Ten players didn't mention a potential boycott and sought substantial discussions with the NCAA and the conference before play began. We have started a dialogue in good faith with the Big Ten and hope the NCAA will follow suit, they said. Given the short time frame and with our season at stake, this conversation must happen now. Along with enhanced safety protocols, the NCAA announced any championships contested could feature a reduced field size and the use of a bubble site familiar to those used by the NBA and NHL to resume their 2019-2020 seasons. Our decisions place emphasis where it belongs, on the health and safety of our college athletes, Emmert said. Student athletes should never feel pressure into playing their sport if they do not believe it's safe to do so. These policies assure that they can make a thoughtful and informed decision about playing this fall. All decisions for fall sports must be made within federal, state, and local COVID-19 guidelines. The 2020 college football season has already underwent a massive overhaul of all Power 5 conferences, announcing adjusted schedules to feature no more than a single non-conference game. And so obviously you can see the NCAA trying to make some things happen, trying to, change some things up. And trying to, make a statement and jump on top of this thing before it gets too crazy or gets too wild and everything. And then the last story we're going to get into, the NCAA Division II and Division III canceled their championships among the COVID-19 pandemic. This article by Scott Polek. There will be no NCAA Division II or Division III championships during the fall season because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Both divisions announced the news Wednesday. The Division II announcement said the decision was made due to the operational and logistical financial challenges presented by the COVID-19 pandemic, while Division III listed the health and safety of the division student athletes, coaches, athletics administrators, and communities as its priority. Both announcements noted the NCAA Board of Governors left the decision on whether to hold the fall sports championship amid the pandemic up to each division. Both divisions are also determined that moving the fall championships to the spring season was not possible. Division II provided more details explaining the board of directors put a number of requirements in place to hold fall sports, including that all member institutions apply re-socialization principles to fall sports and set a 50% sponsorship threshold for all sports championships to be conducted. The re-socialization principles include testing protocols, mask requirements, and other public health measures to help prevent the spread of COVID-19. With the Board of Directors directives, the Division II President's Council determined that it was not feasible to hold off championships as planned or to postpone them as to the spring while prioritizing the health and well-being of student athletes. The announcement read, noting 11 of 23 Division II conferences had already announced they will not hold sports in the fall. Although there will not be any championships, schools and conferences will be allowed to hold their regular seasons in the fall if they can follow the proper protocols in place. What's more, student athletes will retain their year of eligibility if their school and conferences do not play their fall seasons. This announcement comes with plenty of uncertainty around Division I football season. The Power 5 conferences have instituted changes to their schedules that range from canceling non-conference games to pushing back the start date There will also be additional bye weeks in case games need to be rescheduled or postponed. On Wednesday, the College Football Playoff announced its decision to put the selection date back from December 6th to December 20th. As of now, the College Football Playoff is still scheduled to happen with semifinals on January 1st and the National Championship game on the 11th. And there you go. So obviously, as you can tell, a lot of stuff's happening. College football is going through a big shift. They're going through a bigger shift than NFL. And they have a lot of things they need to figure out or things isn't going to work out. So it's going to be big. It's going to be big what happens here and what's all going to like turn out to be. So got to keep an eye on that. Stay tuned. But that's all we have here on the GSMC Football Podcast. Thank you for tuning in and allowing me to be part of your day once again. I know it's a very read-heavy podcast, very informational podcast, but, I just got to inform you guys about what's going on out there. And, they obviously, give my input here and there, but, just got to get y'all guys to understand what's going on out there in the world right now, and the pandemic that's still striking the nation and around the world in general. But, like I said, don't forget to listen to other amazing podcasts here on the GSMC Podcast Network. Also, don't forget to follow us on social media, especially Twitter at Brice signing out. Have a good day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.